Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming to this event. This is the first event of its kind, Admissions and Exclusion Black at Latino at New York City Specialized High School. Today, we will be joined by many brilliant students who have so much to say about the admissions process and what it's like to be a Black and Hispanic student at the Specialized High School. My name is Roberto Quesada. I'm an award-winning artist, a nationally ranked debater, and the president of my class at Brooklyn Tech. I'm also currently a sophomore at the school. I'm joined here by Angie, our co-host.
Good afternoon, everyone. First and foremost, thank you for joining my peers and I tonight to have this very important discussion. My name is Angie Corvallis, and I am a junior at Staten Island Tech, president of the Hispanics and Blacks Club in my school. I'll be your other co-host tonight, as Robbie mentioned. Before we start, I'd like to make everyone aware of some general guidelines for the presentation. This is an event geared toward learning, growing, and understanding, not debate. So please refrain from invalidating our brave student presenters in the chat or offending other attendees. Individuals who repeatedly disrespect student presenters will be removed from the space after warning. So please remember the golden rule. If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say it at all. We'd also like to acknowledge that we stand in solidarity with AAPI students. Our representation in these spaces may not be similar, but our experiences often overlap. Please do not invalidate our voices, stories, or experiences because they don't fit your narrative. Also, please refrain from trolling or spamming the chat. Any questions that you have, please put them in the Q&A function, not in the chat. For our agenda, we will begin with a short introduction, giving general information on specialized high schools, the specialized high school admissions exam, admission numbers this year, and disparities in elementary and middle schools. Following that, we will initiate our admissions panel, in which we dive deep into the realities and pinpoint the flaws of the current admission system as it is seen through the lens of our panelists. Then we will initiate our exclusions panel, in which our panelists will speak to what it feels like to be part of the 9%. Throughout the performances, in the middle of the panels, we will also have some performances from some of our panelists displaying things relevant to our experiences as well. So just to give a rundown about specialized high schools, a specialized high school is one of 9 schools in New York City known for its advanced courses, excellent extracurricular opportunities, and stellar reputation of high acceptance rates to top US universities. These schools are often considered the crown jewels of the DOE because of their amazing opportunities that they have to offer to students. Despite all they have to offer, though, these 9 specialized high schools do not reflect our city as a whole. In a city of so much diversity like New York City, these top schools have an alarming lack of diversity in our student body.
As you can see in these infographics, every year we've seen worse and worse admissions rates of Black and Latino students. This year, we've seen the worst admissions rate in decades at 9% of Black and Hispanic admissions to specialized high schools. The infographics paint an alarming picture. Out of 1,600 offers to Brooklyn Tech, only 64 went to Black students. Out of 750 offers to Bronx Science, only 21 went to Black students. And Staten Island Tech has it the worst this year, with only 1 Black student receiving an offer out of 280 spots. As you can see here, we have an infographic that shows that only 9% of students accepted to specialized high schools this year were Black and Latino, especially considering that 67% of students in the Department of Education are Black and Hispanic. This makes it ever more concerning and shows that our schools do not reflect the diversity of New York City. In addition, we can also see that the numbers are getting worse every single year, painting even more desire for us to create change and to be able to see more Black and Hispanic representation at these high schools. As we're going to see later in this discussion, the lack of Black and Hispanic people at our specialized high schools is causing extreme issues at these schools, including lack of diversity and also racism.
Thank you, Roberto, for that powerful insight into the issue we are discussing tonight. Contrary to proper belief, many people think that the admissions to specialized high schools is based on a variety of factors. In reality, admission to all but one of these specialized high schools does not involve a holistic review of a student, but rather a single 3-hour exam. The only exception to this would be LaGuardia High School. Since it is a performing arts high school, it also involves an interview of sorts or a performance. But the fact that admissions to most of these schools is based on a single 3-hour exam causes students to be seen through a narrow lens, not really being able to display their full potential. And let's not forget how Hispanics and Blacks don't receive the same amount of resources to be able to prepare for such an exam the way other students may. So it places them at a severe disadvantage and makes for an unreasonable form of admissions, considering not even universities go through such a narrow admissions process.
Thank you so much, Angie. And building on what she touched on, which is also in addition to the fact that our admission system is inherently flawed and only looks at one 3-hour aspect of a student, we also have a significant crisis in our elementary and middle school system, where Black and Hispanic middle schools receive much less funding and also have much less access to resources, meaning that students aren't able to learn many of the advanced math or sciences or English requirements. We also see this crisis playing out across many neighborhoods where lower income neighborhoods like the South Bronx or South Jamaica have middle schools with less access to resources than schools in neighborhoods like the Upper West Side of Manhattan, which are known for being much wealthier. Historically, Black and Latino students have been the most impacted by the system. Every year, we see the same news, and it's never changed. Every year, there's a lack of Black and Latino students accepted to New York City specialized high schools. Despite that, however, we never really get representation in this conversation. The media doesn't highlight our voices, we aren't visible on the streets, and people don't talk about our experiences in the specialized high schools. Considering that we are the most affected by the lack of admission rates and the fact that we have to face a lot of the racism once we do get admitted to these specialized high schools, it is so crucial that our voices get to be heard. And that's why today our motto is that the 9% will speak, because you'll finally hear the voices of Black and Latino students who have been silenced for so long. Before we begin our admissions panel, we're going to have a short art performance by Sandra, a drama major at LaGuardia High School.
Hi, my name is Sandra Boachi, and I'll be reading the role of Martha Pentecost from Joe Turner's Come and Gone by August Wilson. I didn't leave her motherless, Harold. Reverend Tolivar wanted to move the church up north because all the trouble the colored folks were having down here. Ain't no telling what was going to happen to us traveling up them roads. We didn't even know if we were going to make it or not. I left with my mama so she could be safe. That was better than taking her ducking and hiding from God knows what. I was looking for you, Harold. Harold, when they told me that Joe Turner had you, I didn't know if you were ever going to come back. It was like I poured my whole life in a cracked jar and watching all leaked out from the bottom. You sitting there talking about Henry Thompson's land like I'm still going to be working that land. How am I going to do that by myself? You weren't gone for 2 years and Henry Thompson kicked me off his land. And I had nowhere else to go but my mama's. So I stayed there and I waited for you for 5 years until one day I woke up and said you were dead. Even if you weren't, you were dead to me. So I buried you, I mourned you, and I picked up my life and went on without you. I was a young woman at my beck. I wasn't going to carry you like a sack of cotton.
Sandra.
Thank you so much, Sandra, for your amazing performance. I think that really goes to show a lot of the talent that we have on today's panel and a lot of the talent at the specialized high schools and among Black and Hispanic students at these schools. We're going to begin our admissions panel, which is going to consist of 7 students, and they're each going to introduce themselves. We have a lot of talent in this group, and we also have a lot of diversity and representation from all of the specialized high schools. So so now I invite all of our panelists to turn on their cameras for the admissions panel, and we're just going to begin by going around and introducing everybody. So we're going to start by introducing each of our panelists, and then we're going to go into the question section where we're going to ask questions relating to admissions at the specialized high schools. Okay. So let's begin. So my name is Roberto Quesada. I go to Brooklyn Tech. I'm a sophomore in the class of 2023, and I'm a sophomore in the class of 2023, and I'm part of our school's debate team. I do a lot of visual art, and I'm also the class president. A lot of my experiences regarding admissions showed me that there's a ton of inequalities in the way that we admit students at our specialized high schools. Starting in middle school, I noticed that we had two different tracks, which was very weird. At our middle school, we had a regular track and then an advanced track. In the advanced track, we only had 2 to 3 Latino students and 1 Black person. And then our school, which is majority Black and Latino, the rest of them were in the regular track, which is where I already started to see many of the divisions that we see in our middle schools. When we went to take the specialized high schools exam, I noticed that even myself, I was very upset with the fact that I was being judged by only a 3-hour exam instead of many of the other facets of my life, where I worked very hard on many other projects and a lot of extracurriculars and building my writing skills just to be judged by a 3-hour examination. And after taking the test, I did find out that I got into Brooklyn Tech, which was one of my dream schools at the time. But I also found that I was the only Latino in my class to get into a specialized high school at the time. And I also found out that there were no Black people from my middle school to get into one. And this really made me wonder, like, why are there a lot of inequalities in the specialized high school admission system? And even coming from the same middle school, how there can be such many disparities in terms of who gets admitted and who doesn't. I'm going to pass it over now to Gabrielle.
Hi, I'm Gabrielle Cayo. I'm a Brooklyn Tech sophomore. I help run our school BSU. I'm a nationally ranked debater. I've worked with New York City to help collect data on police brutality, and I work with adults at Tech in order to unlearn their biases and increase racial equity here. When I was starting to prep for the SHSAT, I did my SHSAT prep in a majority Black and Hispanic area. I live in Bed-Stuy, and the majority of attendees were Black and Hispanic. And I saw through this program that the people who were prepping with me were underprepared, and the test prep wasn't based on the curriculum that we were actually learning in 7th and part of 8th grade, and it was completely new to the majority of the people at the program. So when I went to go take the SHSAT, I found out that I got into Brooklyn Tech, which was my #1 choice, but I was the only person from the program to get in that year, and I didn't see any faces that looked like me at the school my first day, and I saw that numbers were lower than ever, which made me extremely disheartened. So I will be passing this on to Sarai, I believe.
Hi, everyone. I'm currently a senior at Stuyvesant High School, as it says on my name, and I'm really excited to be here. I personally went to Packer for middle school, which is a private middle school in Brooklyn Heights, for those of you who don't know. I was very lucky and fortunate to be able to get immediate access to test prep and whatnot, so I never felt underprepared for the exam. But a reality that I came to realize not only during my time at Stuyvesant, but also during my time during community service initiatives that I led or took part in during high school was that that's not the case for the majority of students, especially not for Black and Latino students in New York City. One of the initiatives that I started, RISE, means that I work directly with middle schoolers in underrepresented communities, students who don't normally go to specialized high schools. And one of my first experiences working at those schools was probably one of the most distressing ones, in which I spoke to a variety of families, many of them with students already in high school, who told me they didn't know what Stuyvesant was. I spoke to families who often needed to communicate in Spanish, who told me, ¿Qué es el SHSAT? What is the SHSAT? What is Brooklyn Tech? And I think not only did that make me upset and angry, but it also made me a little more cognizant of the privilege that comes with test prep access and with, I don't know, immediate knowledge of the way the SHSAT works. I don't think this is an equitable system that's working. And I think that the admissions results speak for themselves. I'm really proud to be part of the 9% speaking today. And I'm so proud of my co-panelists for being here too. I'd like to also pass it off to Angie. Would you like to go now, or I can also pass it off?
Of course. Echoing a lot of what Sarai said, I was privileged enough to go to an elementary school with a lot of resources. I was surrounded by a lot of whites and AAPI students in my elementary school. And it was in my elementary school in my 5th grade that I actually got to tour the Staten Island Tech. I actually got to know specialized high schools. I I really don't know if I would ever be in a specialized high school now if I hadn't gotten that opportunity when I was so young, because thinking back now in my middle school, I never heard the word specialized high school until maybe a month or two before we had to apply to high school. So that's another big flaw, that underrepresented schools with majorly Hispanic and Black students just don't even get awareness that these such schools exist. They don't even become aware that these opportunities are there for them. And without awareness of the opportunities, they don't even get the chance to seek the materials they need to prepare themselves. So not only do they not get the materials to really study for the test prep that other students are lucky to obtain, they don't even get the opportunity to know so they could look for them. So it's really a system that's not benefiting them, that's really disadvantaging them. And it's really something we need to work on. I'd like to pass it now to Dorothea.
Yeah, of course. Hi, my name is Dorothea, and I'm a junior at the Bronx High School of Science. I'm part of Teens Take Charge. I'm also part of my school's diversity committee. So my experience with the SHSAT was actually pretty stressful. I went to Success Academy, which is a predominantly Black and Hispanic charter school. And I think one of the reasons I got into Bronx Science was because my school, they had like an advanced math curriculum. So we were learning about the high school regions when we were only in the 8th grade. And looking back, I realized that's something that not a lot of middle schools do. A lot of middle schools are actually underfunded. So a lot of the stuff that they're teaching in middle schools doesn't come up on the SHSAT. So that really disadvantages the students, and I don't think that's fair. Also, I was like one of the few Black students in my middle school to get in. And I think that this unholistic test shouldn't be the sole factor of admissions. I knew so many smart students in my middle school who unfortunately did not get in. And it's really disheartening because this test does not, show their full potential. And I didn't know about the test until 7th grade. I actually received a letter in the mail during the summer of my 7th grade year. And that was how I learned about all the specialized high schools. So not even my middle school really taught me about the specialized high schools, and they actually kind of discouraged me from going. So I had to seek out resources to prepare and study for the test. I actually went to this thing called the DREAM program, which helps Black and Hispanic students try to get into these specialized high schools. And although they were helpful in a way, I feel like these programs were underfunded in and of itself. And, a lot of like elite test prep programs cost like thousands of dollars, and a lot of families can't afford that. So the DREAM program offered me a way to get test prep for free, but then these programs were underfunded. So clearly there's something wrong with the system, and it's not fair that like students who have such like full potential and students who have a lot of like strength in like math and science and reading don't get the opportunities that other students have. And I think that it's like not fair that the specialized high school admissions are based on like one test. I think there should definitely be a more holistic process. So that's my story.
And our last panelist is Milton, so you can introduce yourself. I think Milton might be AFK, so.
Hi guys, can you hear
you're
me?
here. Yeah, okay.
Hi, my name is Milton. I am a sophomore at Brooklyn Latin. And I remember in my elementary school, which was mostly Black and Latino, the learning was really basic. And I came to find this out when I went to my middle school, which was predominantly Asian and white. And over there, they really cared about colleges and high schools. They were pushing for specialized high schools. And when I went to take the SHSAT, I remember there were very few people that resembled me, like very few people of my color. And that was just like so shocking to me because I remember how many of my friends were going there. And all of them, well, I have a lot of Latino and Black friends. Remember how many of them were going there. It just shocked me how very little of us that were actually there to take the test.
Thank you so much, Milton. So that concludes our introductions, and now we're going to go into some of the questions regarding the specialist high school exam, and we're going to be talking about some of the controversies too regarding the exam and our perspectives on those issues. So we'll just begin with our first, a more generic question, which is, What are some of the main reasons that Black and Hispanic students aren't getting admitted into specialized high schools? And I'll give this one first to Dorothea.
Yeah, sure. So, like I said in my introduction, I think one of the main reasons that Black and Hispanic students don't get into these schools is that a lot of the schools that they happen to be in are like severely underfunded. So they don't have like the teachers or like the course material to learn about the content that is needed to pass the SAT. So that's one problem. And also, just like how test prep can be like really unaffordable and it can cost like thousands and thousands of dollars. And due to systemic racism, Black and Hispanic families, they don't have as much wealth as white families due to like systemic racism. And so that also plays into the fact that they can't afford test prep. And a lot of the schools, they don't give them the opportunities to even attend test prep. And I think that's like not fair at all. And so compounding all these factors, this makes it so that they don't know what's going to be on the SHSAT. And then when they do take it, they don't tend to get into these schools because the curriculum is not designed for the SHSAT. So they're being filled at our schools, and the curriculum is not rigorous enough, and that kind of plays into the fact that they don't get in. But it shouldn't have to be this way. We can eliminate the test, and we can use more representative factors because a lot of these students are smart and they do have potential and they work super hard. But because of this 1 3-hour test, not their full potential gets displayed, and they have to be going to like their zoned nearby high schools, which are also underfunded. So we definitely need to increase funding for these middle schools and implement more rigorous curriculums so that regardless of their social economic status, they're able to get it, and they're able to receive a high quality education anywhere they go.
Thank you so much. And building onto that, we have another question regarding specifically an issue that you just mentioned. So many people, when talking about the SHSAT, mentioned that having a single exam for admissions is the most fair and is the most fair possible system because it's a single exam and everybody takes the same test. They also explain how it's the same test for everybody. So do you think that having the SHSAT as a sole factor for admissions is hurting the amount of Black and Hispanic students? And should we expand that to include other factors as well, kind of like universities and other prestigious high schools from across the country?
I do like to answer. Yeah. Oh, okay. I do think the test is hurting Black and Hispanic students, but it's also hurting everyone. Definitely, like even elite colleges don't rely on like a sole test to for people to get admitted into their college. So it doesn't really make much sense for a single test to be implemented for high school admissions. Also, like I said, the test is like really unholistic, and it's the conditions that surround the test taking that make it unfair for Black and Hispanic students, because Black and Hispanic students make up 78% or around that. They make up the majority of the New York City public school system, but only 9% get offers to specialized high schools, which is really disproportionate. So there has to be something wrong with the test if there's so many Black and Hispanic students taking it, but so few get in. So even though we're taking the same test, the conditions surrounding the test and the way we prepare for the test and the way people like know about the test, all of those factors play into like the low numbers of Black and Hispanic students that get admitted. So the test can't be fair if the conditions surrounding the test aren't fair and are rigged against Black and Hispanic students.
Yeah, and I want to add to what Dorothea was mentioning, specifically the point about how like many universities and other elite high school systems, like from across the country, so like San Francisco and Los Angeles, don't use a single exam for admissions. I know that historically, like it used to be the case that sole exams for admission to universities and high schools was a much more common thing, but in more recently, like a lot of institutions have started moving towards more holistic systems. And I know that personally myself, when I was applying to many of these high schools, I felt like I was qualified to go to a place like Brooklyn Tech, for example, because I knew I had the smarts, but I didn't know if that was something I could prove through a 3-hour exam. And I also know that I had many talented friends, for example, who had a lot of talents, very high grades. They knew how to write like a very good essay, for example, or how to ace an interview, but those weren't things that were considered when applying to the specialized high schools. I'd also like to add other examples, like there are schools in New York City like Townsend Harris, although it's a more humanities oriented school that does consider other factors besides a single exam. I think they've been historically ranked like #1 in the state for like the past 3 years. So I think that's also proof that, switching to a more holistic system doesn't mean that we're going to just destroy the academic success of many of these schools. In fact, I think the opposite might happen in a sense. If you use more holistic factors, not only might we see more Black and Hispanic students, because now you don't have to, because now admissions is based more on what we teach in middle schools and also on other talents, but I also think we're going to select students who are much more well equipped for these high schools. And I think that's what we're seeing in many of these systems. So now, is there anybody else who'd like to answer this question? Sarai, you can go.
Thank you. I think it's kind of a foolish example, but I think it's simple enough and easy to understand. There's a difference between equality and equity. And if you think of, like, I don't know if any of you've seen that photo of 3 different people, all different heights, trying to look over a fence. If you give everyone the same stool, presumably you have someone who's like 4 feet tall and someone who's 6 feet tall, then not everyone's going to be able to see over that fence, because the person who's shortest needs more resources in order to be able to see over it. Of course, a taller person doesn't need that. If you give everyone stools according to their height, then you're going to see an example where everyone's getting equal access to seeing over that fence. And I know, again, foolish, but it translates really well here. And I like the way Dorothea explained it, particularly because I think what she's saying is that when there are already presumably different factors that feed into the amount of education that Black and Latino students are getting, especially in low-income neighborhoods, schools where middle schools or schools might not be as competitive or as good or as well-funded as private schools or schools in different neighborhoods, then you're going to see different results on the same exact exam. And that means that, of course, the exam isn't equal. It's not providing equal opportunity, especially if you see disproportionate access to test prep. I know a lot of people in the chat are mentioning how expensive it can be and how some families just can't make the decision to spend thousands of dollars on prep for one single exam. I also think knowledge about access to exams in the first place is completely ridiculous. Like I mentioned earlier, I have been to neighborhoods like Sunset Park. I've spoken to families. I've looked mothers in the face and I've heard the words, "I don't know what Stuyvesant is. I have a child in high school and I don't know what Stuyvesant is." To me, that's a travesty. And it's also just a prime example of the fact that going into the exam, we're not all coming from the same place, and the city isn't doing enough to supplement that. And it's been too long for us to continue to wait for schools to get better. It's been too long for us to wait for, I don't know, better outreach to children. Something needs to change. And I think, though I don't know if I don't know what the exact immediate solution would be. I think that systemic change is necessary and it must happen now. And as you're going to hear a lot later, the current admissions rates affect the students in specialized high schools. I can speak to that experience myself.
Thank you so much. And now we have a question from, we actually have a question from somebody who explains what other factors would you want specialized high schools to implement instead of the SHSAT? So if somebody would just like to just quickly, like in 15 seconds, explain quickly some factors you'd like to see.
I would say that specialized high schools admissions should be modeled very similarly to college admissions. College admissions go over transcripts, they go over coursework, they go over awards, your extracurriculars, a wholesome look at the student in order to decide that they'll not only be a good academic fit, but a good personal fit for the community. So to answer your question, those are just another couple of elements that specialized high schools should implement on top of the SHSAT. Just to give a more holistic view and give more opportunity to students instead of just a 3-hour exam.
Yeah, I also want to add, I think like an essay or interview format would also be helpful. I know a lot of schools do that, but currently the SHSAT doesn't actually test your ability to write, which I think just goes to prove how like this 3-hour exam can't really assess whether somebody is prepared for, going to one of these specialized high schools. But I think that testing writing ability, and also students can mention like certain conditions and obstacles they've had to face in their essays as well, which can be very helpful when trying to get students while selecting students for these schools. Okay, so I think that moves us past those questions. And now we're just going to have one more question regarding inequality in middle school. So if one person would just like to answer this question, in the long term, what do you think the Department of Education should do to increase the quality of Black and Hispanic middle schools, especially when regarding the admission system? And Gabby,
I
you
guess
can
I can jump in here. So I think increasing the equality of Black and Hispanic middle schools not only has to happen on a DOE, like NYC DOE level, but also needs to happen on a federal level. I think number one, we need to remove the fact that current schools are funded by property taxes. So if you're living in a poorer neighborhood, you're not going to have the same quality education of school as you are if you're living in a more rich neighborhood with people who have property taxes that are like through the roof compared to Black and Hispanic neighborhoods, especially underserved Black and Hispanic neighborhoods. I also think when you're looking at the DOE, we need to increase teacher pay and specifically incentivize people to go into Black and Hispanic neighborhoods and want to teach in those neighborhoods. Because when teachers are being paid $60,000 a year, number one, it increases teacher burnout because they're not getting enough time to prep, they're getting too many students, they're not getting enough pay. But number two, you're not going to be incentivized to go into lower income schools because the money is where private schools are and where rich schools are. So we need to incentivize both teachers and like the DOE to pour more funding into these areas.
Thank you so much, Gabrielle. And now I'm going to go into another question about more your personal experiences. So if two people would like to answer this, do you know any Black or Hispanic students or any students in general who you think would have excelled at a specialized high school but weren't identified as qualified under our current admission standards? And we can start with Angie.
Yeah, for sure. I could name countless students in my middle school who were just as intelligent as me and prepared probably 10 times even more than I ever did for that test. And they weren't accepted. And it really truly is disappointing because you see these students go to other local schools, and they're in an atmosphere where there are other students not at their level, so they don't get the same amount of opportunities, they don't get that same level of education. And just because of a 1 3-hour test, I know well that the effort would have been there, they would have excelled in those schools, they would have done amazing in those classrooms, they would have contributed to the conversations, they would have been perfect students there. But just that 1 3-hour test just wasn't able to measure their capabilities, and it truly is disappointing.
Thank you. And would anybody else like to answer this question? I'd like to mention, I personally knew a lot of very, very intelligent Black and Hispanic students at my high school, but not even like just Black and Hispanic students. I also knew many talented AAPI students at my middle school who they were just very smart. Many of them put as much effort, if not more effort than me into their schoolwork. But unfortunately, they were not able to get access to test prep for the SHSAT. So when the admission cycle rolled around, it was very upsetting to see many of my very bright friends just get rejected from many of these schools because of this 3-hour exam. And it was upsetting. And I think that shows also like beyond the scope of like Black and Hispanic students, this is also an admissions process that affects everybody. And it really causes a lot of hurt, and also just, it prevents us from really finding many gifted students who would have done well, but weren't identified by the system.
I also think, just quickly adding on to that, I met a lot of students at Brooklyn Tech who were like getting like thousands of dollars in test prep in order to get into these schools. I met so many students through the SHSAT program that I went through who were just so smart and so talented and bright and deserved to be in these schools. And then when I got to Brooklyn Tech, I thought, hey, this school is going to be the best because of this test. I was still like incredibly naive to the effects of the SHSAT. And then when I got to the school, I met students who were having their parents pay them off in order to not get failing grades in classes. So I think that's like the best representation of what the SHSAT is really putting into specialized high schools, because I met so many students who were like straight A students in their middle school, valedictorian, were constantly working hard and trying to improve. And then I met so many students at Brooklyn Tech who were really only there because they got thousands of dollars in test prep because their parents wanted them to go.
Yeah, and building on that question, we're going to go on another topic regarding admissions, and this one is specifically about one criticism about exams that isn't mentioned much, which is the ability to cheat. So one criticism of the single exam system is that some students might be able to cheat on the SHSAT to be able to get into these schools. And I just want to ask if you have any personal experiences with students like bragging about cheating or speaking about that. I can start with Gabrielle.
Cool. So it became very clear to me that a lot of students were using cheating in order to get into the SHSAT schools. Like I met a lot of students who were pretending to have ADHD or ADD or different neurological processing disorders in order to get extra hours on the test so that they could do better and then would eventually get into these schools. And they would have their doctors like write them fake notes about having neurological like issues or having like mental processing challenges in order to get into schools, which I found absolutely ridiculous. And I knew that this would never be something that would happen in Black and Hispanic neighborhoods because we don't even know like to do that. Like that is something that has happened so many times. And I've heard it from multiple students at Tech, like bragging about them being able to get this extra time.
Thank you so much, Gabrielle. And now, does anybody else want to answer this question, or we can move forward to more? Okay, great. So another question we have is, let's just go into one of the sections in the chat. So many supporters of the SHSAT cite the decline of gifted and talented programs in elementary and junior schools as one of the reasons why there's few Black and Hispanic students at the specialized high schools, GAMS. Do you think that gifted and talented programs have had any impact on admissions, and what impact would bringing it back or adding it have? Anyone can answer.
I can go. So that's definitely a point to be brought up. And I think that gifted and talented programs, although like, you know, people like to think that gifted and talented programs are beneficial to students and they provide high quality education, like all schools should like have a gifted and talented curriculum. And that goes back to like my previous point in saying that like, you know, there shouldn't even be a need for like specialized high schools because all schools should be specialized and all schools should give high quality education to students. And the gifted and talented program also has its flaws too, you know, testing children at like abnormally young ages, such as like 4 or 5, and then, you know, determining like the school that they get into for the rest of their life and for the rest of their academic career based on that one test when they're 4 or 5 years old is also not necessarily a great way to, you know, admit students into like elite schools. And so definitely expanding the high quality education, and also back to Gabrielle's point about like just, you know, paying teachers more and making sure that people enjoy and love learning and not like, you know, test like everything and, you know, make learning like a natural and organic process instead of trying to cram in all these tests, because tests are not indicative of a student's intelligence. And so the gifted and talented program also has its flaws too. And some kids who are smart don't get into these gifted and talented programs. And so it also raises the question of like inequality when it comes to these programs and like the access that kids have to like even prep for these programs as well. Like, I don't think it's reasonable to be prepping kids like 4 or 5 years old for a test. And the gifted and talented program, these tests that are correlated to the gifted and talented programs, they're not representative of the student's full potential either. It's a lot of like logic and like reasoning, but like there's no like writing on there, and there's not really a significant amount of reading comprehension on those tests as well. And, you know, that's really important for a child's development. And also gifted and talented tests, they don't even like measure a child's like social skills or how they're able to interact with their peers, which are also indicators of success in schools. So yes, a gifted and talented program, it may seem like, you know, it emits like bright students, but like all students are bright in their own way. And so that test has flaws too. And again, goes back to the elitism that perpetuates, and, you know, it's a cycle, you know, like you get into a gifted and talented school and then you get into a good middle school and then you get into specialized high school. And like, you know, a lot of these people are privileged. And so definitely just expanding the high quality education in like all schools, as opposed to like a certain few, is the way to go here.
Thank you so much, Dorothea. And we only have about 6 minutes left with the specific panel before we move on with our program. So I'm just going to ask two more questions. We're running admission. So one is one of the main arguments in favor of the SSAT and also like regarding admissions in general is that there are many AAPI students from low income backgrounds who are able to get into specialized high schools, which proves that the issue with specialized high school admissions is culture in Black and Hispanic communities. Do you think this is the case? And what would you say in response to somebody with that argument? I can start with Angie.
I would say that it's definitely not about disadvantaging anybody else. Our goal here is really to bring to an equal standing Hispanics and Latinos who don't get the resources that they want. And inherently, as we've mentioned many times before, the test isn't just a disadvantage for Latino and Blacks, it's a disadvantage for AAPI as well, as one single test isn't enough to gauge what a student can do. AAPI students have the same capability as Black and Latino students in a holistic review. So it really shouldn't boil down to a discussion like that. And in terms of culture and everything, a lot of people do argue that Black and Hispanics don't have the same level of discipline as AAPI students in terms of their culture. They're not, education isn't instilled in our culture the same way it is for AAPI students. You know, there's always that stereotype of Asian students saying that their parents won't need them to be a doctor or be a lawyer, like they have higher standards. And that's not really seen in Black and Hispanic students. But it's because the opportunities aren't there. If we were to give more opportunities, if we were to give the resources necessary, Black and Hispanic students would feel more motivation to pursue the same opportunities and to find that discipline that is supposedly lacking in our culture.
Yeah, I'd like to add on to Angie that I think a lot of this is just, examples of like the model minority myth or just examples of trying to pit people against each other. I think specifically in many ways, like there are many AAPI students I know who are very talented and didn't get into specialized high schools because they weren't able to afford the test prep that they needed to get in. And that's also a big reason why a ton of AAPI students get rejected every single year from specialized high schools. But in addition to that, I just like to add on to the culture question. I think it's mostly a question of like the lack of access to resources in these Black and Hispanic neighborhoods in terms of the middle schools and also the education that people get. And I think that pinning it on culture is not going to help us increase these numbers and increase like our access to education. Anybody else would like to answer this question?
Yeah, I'd like to speak on it very quickly. Two things. To the culture argument, I also think that there's a very valid discussion to be had also about immigrant culture and how that might change the perspective of certain families. In that respect, I know someone in the chat actually mentioned something about Caribbean parents and African parents. I'm personally an African American. My parents are both from here, or my father, who's Black, is from here. But I think that there's a valid conversation to be had about that being more about immigrant culture rather than a racial culture. And I think that the argument that for whatever reason Black students aren't smart or aren't diligent or hardworking, I think that's fair to say. That'd be pretty racist to say. Additionally, it's not about taking seats from other people. And I think to even pose the question in that manner, not you, Roberto, obviously, but like the people who propose that argument, it sort of exposes the mentality that like, this is ours, this is my school. And I think it's very disappointing when we have that conversation because of course it's nobody's school except for New York City's. It's my school, it's also your school, it's the school of every New York City public school kid who deserves a place to learn, to have great teachers, to get to experience the joys and also the worst parts of high school. That is a right that we all have. These public schools serve us. And I think it's disappointing to hear that argument because it should all be about accessibility and having us all get access to these same exams, the same competitive processes that let us enter these schools.
Thank you so much, Sarai. And yeah, I'd like to add on to that I think this also talks about like the longer term goals which were discussed here, which is that at the end of the day, it's not just about the specialized high schools as well, but in the grand scheme of things, we want to see more high schools that are advanced. We want to see more opportunities for students. Every high school at the end of the day should have access to these advanced placement programs, these extracurricular activities, and access to these resources. And I think that's really the conversation that, this is turning into, and something about bringing equality and equity and opportunity to all students. So I want to thank all of our panelists for speaking. That's the end of our session, and thank you so much for all this information. If you have any other questions, we do have panelists typing and answering questions in the Q&A section. Thank you so much again. And now we're going to have an art performance before we move on to our exclusion panel, which is going to talk about the experiences of racism and discrimination and racist cultures at specialized high schools once students get in. So that should be exciting. And thank you, everybody. So panelists can turn their cameras off now, and we're going to move into our next art performance. And I'm not going to turn off my camera because it is my art performance. So yes, I'm just going to begin by sharing the screen, and then we can begin. Okay, everybody. So this is going to be my art performance. Specifically, I'm a visual artist. Ever since I was little, I've loved painting and art, and I think it's a very great way to express your ideas and to talk about many of the issues facing students. So I'm going to start with the first art piece in my collection. This one is called Due at 11:59 p.m. And this one actually won an award. So it's on display at the Metropolitan Museum of Art for a year, and is also permanently part of their digital collection. I really love this art piece because I think it goes to show a lot of the struggles that New York City students and students across the country and world are facing during remote learning. You can see that I'm very tired in this art piece, barely gripping onto the textbooks and laptop. And, it's like every day I'm just controlled by these deadlines, due at 11:59. That's the main goal of every single day, just trying to get through school. I also try to include like a lot of details in like the cloth and the couch to show that I'm trying to find relaxation and peace during this time. Like while I'm doing this stressful homework, I'm trying to get the blankets, I'm trying to get the fancy couch, and it's still not working, of course, but it shows that there's attempts being made to get relaxation. And it shows that we really need to be more aware of the mental health of our students during the pandemic and how this really is affecting students, teachers, and other people in the school environment. My next art piece, which you may have seen on some of the flyers for this event, is called Admissions. Admissions in New York City, the Black and Hispanic Perspective. So this art piece also had a 2-month tenure at the Metropolitan Museum of Art through the Scholastic competition. And I'm very proud of this art piece because I think it shows a lot of the sentiments when students have when applying to specialized high schools. You can see the big wall, which represents the SHSAT, and people are falling off, there's blood, a lot of people don't make it across this wall. But you can also see on the other side, like the golden schools, right? The schools with the advanced classes, with the extracurriculars that are going to propel you to success, or at least that's the idea you're given when you're climbing the wall. I think this is a very powerful art piece. It's one of my favorite ones that I've done. And I think that it really represents a lot of the sentiments students have when applying to schools. The last art piece I'm going to show you today is called The Hidden Hero. This is an art piece I made at the start of the pandemic. I live in Queens, and I noticed that a lot of neighborhoods, especially Black, Hispanic, and Asian neighborhoods, were really suffering the most under the pandemic in terms of the virus spreading, people spreading hate, and a lot of the trauma that came with like the death from the pandemic. And I wanted to make an art piece that really honored many of the essential workers, so doctors and teachers who were doing so much work during the pandemic to help us maintain some level of existence as a city. I, for example, put this doctor who's looking at you like very tired. It's very clear that there's been long shifts, doctors, had to do so much work during the pandemic, very tiring, barely any breaks, just because of how many patients were going in. You can also see ambulance, which is supposed to represent like the dead bodies that were being sent. And also I remember refrigerator trucks with dead bodies at the start of the pandemic. In the back is Elmhurst Hospital, which was one of the centers of the pandemic and was all over the news. Especially I live in Queens, so this was one of the hospitals in our area that was facing the brunt of the pandemic. And Lastly, my last symbols here are just the storm, which represents the virus coming into the city, and also the World Trade Center in the background. For me, this represents how New York City has gone through many crises before and many disasters as well. But as New Yorkers, we've always come together, not just to learn from what happens, but also to rebuild and come back stronger and better. And hopefully in the future, we can look to the helpers, as in the quote, and create a better world after this pandemic and come back even stronger as a city. So thank you so much for looking at my art pieces. I hope you enjoyed them. And now we can get back to our programming with our exclusion panel, which I'm very excited for because we're going to have many students talking about the racist culture at the specialized high schools and a lot of the issues facing the 9% at these schools. So I invite all of our panelists for exclusion to turn on your cameras. You can do this now. And we have a lot of talent here too. As you can see, student government members, we have people who are part of citywide equity councils and artists too. So this should be very exciting. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and we can begin with our introduction. So we're just going to go around and begin introducing everybody in the panel. And we're going to begin with Mamadou. Take it away.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mamadou. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a junior at Bronx Science. I'm part of the student council at my school and also part of the student diversity committee. On the topic of exclusion, I feel like a lot of things that tend to be ignored is the transition of social environments. So I'll speak for myself personally. I went from a middle school. I attended MS 118, middle school that was predominantly Black and Hispanic students, to a school that was mostly students of API community or white. And it was kind of hard really to kind of transition into that because the only form of the only types of representation that I see from this community is from the media. And then I kind of had to act in that type of manner. So I found myself kind of changing the way I spoke or the way that I acted in front of these people just to kind of fit in. And it was also the beginning of high school. So I think everyone here kind of acknowledges that social anxiety that comes from that. And it was kind of hard. It was kind of hard to kind of see how I should act or how I should kind of retaliate in terms of all like the jokes that were said. So I kind of appreciate the pandemic, kind of put a pause on all this social type of stuff. So it's kind of home by myself. I realized I didn't really have to act the way that I did. We're gonna speak about this more later on, but I want to kind of hint at it right now. Um, in terms of like academics, people kind of tend to look down on you as if you couldn't get here on your own. And then for me personally, when I realized that this is freshman year, so instead of trying to combat it, I kind of tended to feed into that as well. So making myself the butt of those jokes to kind of ease away that embarrassment. But like now as a junior, kind of like looking back, I understand like the foolishness of it. But I do like my heart goes out to anybody else who's in that position as well. But yeah, I'll pass on to the next presenter speaker.
Brianna, I think you're going now.
Hi, I'm Brianna. I am currently a junior at the High School of American Studies. I'm part of Teens Take Charge, working on the admissions campaign. I'm also part of my school's equity and diversity committee, as well as student government, community service, and a number of other clubs. So yeah, when I first got the acceptance letter from my school, I was over the moon with excitement. It was my top school and I was so excited to have gotten in. But what I didn't realize was all of the implications that would have for me, mostly when it came to representation, right? So going into my school, I expected it to be like any other school in the Bronx, you know, lots of diversity, lots of Black and brown students. But when I went to take my placement test, I quickly realized that was not the case. I remember looking around the room and not seeing anyone like me. And then within the first week of school, my worst fears were confirmed. And I was sitting in my Spanish class, first week of school. So I was completely new, didn't really know anyone. And I heard a student call me a racial slur. And in that moment, it was like the worst thing ever had happened to me. I didn't know what to do. And it was just very isolating. You know, I didn't have anyone that had come from my middle school with me. It was just kind of me there by myself. And I didn't really know who to reach out to, which I think is a common occurrence in these schools, is that there's no support system for students of color. Like, what do you do when you experience racism? Who do you go to? Who do you talk to? Especially when you're new in the school, it's a lot to deal with. And throughout the rest of my years at HSAS until now, there have been many other microaggressions, racism, and such. And for me, that's kind of moved me into activism for sure, in educational equity activism and trying to reform the system, which is a huge burden to place on Black and Hispanic students, because now we feel like we have to change the entire culture of our schools. We have to change the entire culture of our schools. We have to work to reform admissions just so that we can feel included in a space where we should be getting an education. And it's definitely diverts from our education. It's definitely detracted from my ability to stay focused in school. So I will pass it to the next panelist, which I'm not sure who that is, but I will pass it to Elizabeth.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Yard. I'm a senior at Queens High School for the Sciences. And so basically my story is that I'm no stranger to discrimination in school, as I was also a minority at my middle school. And the only reason I was able to learn about the exam is because I was lucky enough to be in a school that helped promote the test, but that's not the case for majority of middle schools that are majority Black and Hispanic. I also went to the DREAM program as it was affordable test prep for more Black and Hispanics to enter specialized high schools, but there is a severe lack of teachers, access to lunch, as well as settings that are not in the best tidiness. So these programs that help us are heavily underfunded, and this is a major problem in itself. However, coming to a specialized high school felt more like a time of isolation with consistent manipulation, gaslighting, and normalized microaggressions. Within my first 24 hours, I was told that my first friend's mom would rather him be gay than date a Black woman. That would be the first of many days of feeling like a Black sheep. Everyone assumed I only got in through the Discovery program, even my classmates' mothers. The N-word was a normal vocabulary word thrown around in the hallway as if it held no weight. Teachers would confuse me with the other 3 Black girls in my grade who held no resemblance to each other but can easily distinguish 2 kids with the same first and last name with no issue. I was called a slur in the middle of my freshman advisory, and this girl who constantly made snark remarks about my complexion, I was ready to physically confront her. However, in that moment I stood up to her, I paused as I would become another Black angry woman stereotype, as all my colleagues already assumed that about me. And that's how it feels to be in a specialized high school. It feels as if you either have to completely deflect from being a stereotype or become the stereotype in order to somewhat entertain or become friends with other people, which is very mentally exhausting. The Black Student Union was my only safe ground, and I soon realized that this was the norm. My friends were called female slaves, the N-word with the R to their face while eating, and how a boy would love my friend's body if it was on an Asian woman. To be sexualized, stereotyped, and harassed would become normalcy, with everyone turning their eyes to the intensity and severity of this issue. I started to develop panic attacks, and I walked around anxious, waiting for the next racist remark to hit me in the face. But the thing is that most of these kids have never had a Black friend, never learned how to develop cultural sensitivity since they were only around people who look like them. And this is why we need diversity. So kids that look like me won't feel isolated and will no longer be the minority, as it's so much easier to manipulate a smaller group of people. Kids will be forced to interact with kids of different races and develop racial sensitivity, and we need to make these specialized high schools a safe place for all children. I tutored for the SHSAT in a special program meant to diversify specialized high schools, and one of the kids actually got into my school specifically. And although I'm happy that we're a step closer to making these schools more diverse, I'm afraid that I'm bringing them into another 4 years of racial trauma that they already have to face outside of these doors. Thank you. And I'll be passing it on to the next panelist. Is that Angie or Gabrielle?
I think that's me. Okay. So I came from a majority white middle school, and racism was extremely prevalent there, but the racism at Brooklyn Tech can definitely be seen as unbearable for some students. So on my first day of high school, I got asked by a random kid in the hallway if I would make him watermelon and fried chicken, and I heard a constant use of the N-word in the hallways that I obviously couldn't stop because I was the only Black person there. I also had people constantly asking me for my SHSAT score, and when I would provide it to them and it was higher than theirs, they would just like immediately get extremely defensive and back away and would like use a whole bunch of microaggressions against me instead of like actually treating me like a student who deserved to be at Tech. I also lost the majority of my friends in freshman year, as I had a kid call me the N-word in my lab class, and people who were supposed to be my friends started cursing at me and telling me that I was being dramatic and I needed to stop because I was ruining the vibe of the class. I also had a lot of my white friends being only friends with me while it was convenient and saw me as the angry Black girl after a student said to me in class the N-word around 8 times. And then when I called him out on it, both the students in the class and the teacher excused his behavior and said that it was because he was high and he wasn't a bad person. The staff have also been known for saying the N-word in classes, and literally students have had to beg to switch out of certain teachers' classes because those teachers are literally known racist and they have never been punished for it at all. And once when I got into an altercation with a student where the student was very obviously on the wrong end, the administration just told me that it was neighborhood stuff and I needed to leave it at home, which was very obviously a microaggression. My anxiety got extremely bad from being in this school setting. And while it was already bad from all the racism that happened at my middle school, it was just so much worse at Tech because it was just surrounding me. And your mental health just decreases so much at SHSAT schools. And I know that if I hadn't found trying to channel this anger and this energy into trying to fix the school and into BSU and into spaces that were led by Black and Hispanic students, I probably would not be succeeding at Tech the way that I am today. And I will pass it on to Angie.
First and foremost, I would really like to take a moment to really thank our panelists for sharing these incredibly angering, incredibly infuriating stories, all these traumatic events that they have gone through in these schools. And this is just to remind everyone why we are here tonight. It is because of these stories that we have come together right now to talk to these issues. It is because of these stories that we need to bring more diversity, more acceptance to our specialized high school. So many people in the comments thanking our panelists for being so brave about their experiences, but they shouldn't have to be brave. They shouldn't have to be going through these things. But I just wanted to take a moment to say that, and to our panelists, thank you. And we will keep fighting so you guys don't have to keep going through these injustices. In terms of my own experiences, I can say I have been lucky enough to not really experience severe out straight racism this way. But I feel like that's mainly because I've been more isolated. In my entire high school experience, I was first a freshman in Brooklyn Tech. So I did attend Brooklyn Tech for a year. Then I transferred to Staten Island Tech. And in both my years, I was very secluded. I didn't really like to become a part of so many friend groups, get to know people in that matter. And I feel like that's what protected me from such racism. But it's completely unfair that I should have to isolate myself, that I should have to keep myself at bay so I don't have to go through the things that my peers here have gone through. So it's just, overall, it's just incredibly infuriating, incredibly saddening that such things should have to go through, that such stories have to be told. So one way or another, just to remind everyone why we are here tonight, truly.
Thank you so much. And I think that's all of our panelists for the exclusion section.
No, I haven't spoken yet.
Oh, okay. Sandra, you should go. I'm so sorry.
I'm so sorry. My camera's on right now because I am at work. Let me start your card. But I do still want to speak on this panel, so I'm multitasking right now, which is one thing that I'm pulling up for. But going to a predominantly white institution has been a very rough 4 years. I'm a senior at LaGuardia High School. So definitely going to PWI was one of the rough parts of it all. One of my experiences happened my sophomore year dealing with a racist white teacher when she belittled me, failed me on purpose, tried any way that she can to try to exclude me out of the class. She tried to put me in a mental institution because I try to stand up for myself. I'm somebody who I don't like being, when I'm pushed, I stand up for myself. So when put in that predicament, I was left with no other choice. And I had to tell my principal that I would not go back to class unless you removed her. So I had to risk my own education just for things to go the proper way. And the one thing that I've learned is that, you know, white kids have no respect for Black culture. I walk down the hallway and I see Black kids just, not Black kids, white kids just yell the N word and like, you know, go rah, 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 I'm gangster, I'm this and that. And it's just like, you have no respect for Black culture at all. And I have to put people in their place multiple times saying that, you know, you're not allowed to say that. And they're just like, but I'm Albanian or I'm this, so I have a right to say it. So that's what going to LaGuardia has taught me, that one that white kids. And yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Sandra. And I think that that does conclude our panelists for this. So that should be all of our panelists. I personally would also like to add on to my experience being Latino at Brooklyn Tech. I know that Gabrielle and I have had a lot of shared experiences because we are debate partners. So we often do share a lot of experiences when we're in school and also going to debate tournaments. I personally have had a lot of people question my intelligence going to Brooklyn Tech. So people, again, constantly asking for my SHSAT score, whether I got into the school through discovery, and asking for other information to try to prove that like I'm not as smart or as well deserving to go to Brooklyn Tech, even though I definitely know that I'm deserving of going to the school. And I've also had many instances in places like Spanish class, for example, where I'm the only Latino in the Spanish class. So what ends up happening is that, you know, teachers will start talking about different aspects of our culture or aspects of our language, and students will just mock it or make fun of it or just start talking about racial slurs. I've had instances where like I'm in class and then students tell me that like, oh, Roberto, like, when are you going to go back to your country? Like, when are you going back to Mexico? Even though I'm not even from Mexico. And all of these experiences to me, they just show that I think there's a lack of understanding of Black and Hispanic students at the specialized high schools. And personally, I also relate to Angie in the sense that I've had to, um, you know, in many cases, like try to change my behavior or the way I act to try and fit in and not have to deal with a lot of the racism. There's been examples, you know, where I was in a class and a teacher told me that like I had to change my accent in order to like fit in and sound more professional and more, you know, sound more professional and to actually be in this academic environment. And I think those are just examples that even among staff members, you cannot have faith that they're going to respect you and your identity. So going forward with this panel, we have a couple of questions regarding exclusion at the specialized high schools. So we're just going to begin at the level of students, or actually at the member of staff. So have you experienced racism from staff members at your school? And if so, how did that take place? Anyone can answer.
Okay, I'll go ahead. So basically, I was talking about it in my speech, but there, in one of my math classes, so there's only four black girls in my entire grade, and it would just be this ongoing joke with like a few of the teachers that we all look the same, but we look nothing alike, and it would just constantly be like them purposely calling me the other black girl's name, and they would constantly think that it was funny. And it was just like, no, it's actually very dehumanizing for you to assume that we all look like just because we're African American. But then when it came to two kids with the exact same first and last name, they were just like, oh, we know who those two kids are, but we don't know. You look just like the other person. And it was just like an ongoing joke between staff. And then they had to have a whole meeting about it.
Anybody else would like to take this question? If not, then we can move on to our next question, which is going to focus on accountability among staff members. So specifically, do you feel that your school and its administration and staff do enough to keep Black and Hispanic students safe? So for example, if there is a racist incident or if you face a microaggression or a hate crime and you try to report it, do you feel comfortable telling staff? Do you think staff will do something? Sandra, you can answer.
No, my school doesn't take accountability for these type of situations, which is the one thing that I dislike about my school. When my situation happened, I told my guidance counselor, and my apologies. Her solution was for us to sit down and have a meeting and talk about our feelings. In this type of circumstance, there's no feelings to talk about. I am personally feeling targeted by a teacher, and you telling me to sit there and talk about my feelings is definitely inappropriate, especially if the teacher does not want to be in the same room as me. This is no feelings talk. It's not the same thing about having a therapy session talking about my emotions. A teacher's targeting me, you fix it. And first of all, you should be doing full background checks on your teachers before you hire them, point blank, period. You should definitely look at the teachers that you're hiring, and there should be no such thing as having a racist teacher, especially in a school full of Black and Hispanic kids. I'm so sorry. And if you tell me and you sit there and you communicate with me telling me that, oh, the best thing to do is call your parents, bring your parents in. I'm sorry, my parents is not going to say anything that I'm not going to tell you. My parents are not going to say anything that I'm not going to say. I'm going to tell you straight up. She needs to be gone, point blank, period. And a lot of the teachers love to tend to sugarcoat things because they don't want to look bad. But I'm sorry, money does not surpass anything. I'm going to tell you point blank, period, where you stand, and you should hold your coworkers accountable. Do not sugarcoat it. And that's how I feel about my school taking accountability. Thank you.
Oh yeah, you can go, Gabrielle.
Yeah, I would just like to add on really quickly that the administration at Tech is part of the problem and is very racist and, from my personal experience, very anti-Black. Specifically in my freshman year, we had an incident where someone at our school wrote the N-word in toilet paper in the girls' bathroom, I believe, in the bathroom stall. And instead of actually addressing it, our principal just recycled a speech that he used the year before to talk about anti-Semitism. And then when people called him out on it, like, there was literally no apologies. There was no actually taking accountability for his actions about not actually addressing what was going on at the school. And that's just a constant trend in Brooklyn Tech, where there is absolutely no accountability for the racist things that happen both among students and among teachers. So you can see, like, specifically just like admin, I mentioned this before, but I had admin tell me that an altercation with another student was just neighborhood stuff. And then when my parents came into the school, because I told them that this admin was racist, he lied about it and said that, like, he could never be racist and that, like, that would just never happen and that I was lying about what happened. And I also had and there are also multiple experiences with teachers being called out for being literally violently racist or constantly using the N-word and making their Black students feel unsafe, and nobody fires or reprimands them. And I've had multiple teachers literally walk by students calling other students racial slurs without actually taking any sort of accountability, without any repercussions whatsoever. And that's just, like, the very blatant racist stuff. The school admin is literally the problem, and, like, underlying, like, all the microaggressions that the school admin will do, where they will treat me very differently from the first week of school, where they think that, like, I'm ghetto, or, like, associate very negative stereotypes with me, to the second where, like, they can actually see that I participated, shows that there is absolutely no bias training that's going on, shows that teachers are just very much allowed to do whatever they want and don't actually have to think about the effects of their actions, and don't actually have to end any of the racism that's going on at the school because it's just tolerated and accepted.
Yeah, I want to actually add to Gabrielle about the instances at Brooklyn Tech. I think that one of this was actually mentioned in the chat, the fact that our school often likes to talk about how it has, like, award-winning STEP teams and, like, you know, a lot of successful Black students, but then, like, when it's actually in school, they don't do anything to protect, like, our Black and Hispanic students. And I think that just goes to show how, like, in many cases you feel tokenized and, like, you're just being used on, like, the pamphlets and stuff to show that there's diversity at Brooklyn Tech, especially because one of the biggest talks is that Brooklyn Tech is an example of diversity, even though it's like 60 Black people and, like, I think it's like 80 or 100 Hispanic people, like, that's out of a class of 1,600, right? I also want to add that, you know, in my experience, like, I'm in the school student government, right? And we've had conversations where people have told me, like, you can't really speak out about this racist incident, or, like, you can't make this blow up because then, like, the New York Post or the New York Times is going to catch on and it's going to make our school look so bad in the media and things like that, to try to prevent the school from looking bad. Like, they'd rather save their reputation than actually talk about many of the issues that we're experiencing. And even I've, like, you know, I've given up on reporting racist incidents because I've done it before. And, you know, I have staff members tell me, well, I know that kid. He's just weird like that. You have to you have to adjust to it or get used to it. And I'm just thinking like, this is not something that I should be getting used to. Like, you need to hold people and students accountable for racism, especially when it's happening during school hours. But I think that just goes to show how the lack of diversity is just causing all of these problems to pull over and get worse. Is there anybody else who wants to answer this question about if you think your school administration does enough?
Oh, I'm sorry. I just wanted to add on really quickly to the Brooklyn Tech stuff. There was an incident at Tech this year where a kid was wearing a KKK mask in his Spanish class, and there was absolutely nothing done. He got suspended for like maybe a week, and it was never talked about. Like, it was literally like they tried to suppress it so hard where nobody actually, like, none of the admin ever wanted to make any sort of announcements about the racism that happened in school. He literally just came back to class just like normal after his week suspension, which I think he should have been expelled, because that's literally like a hate crime. Like, that is like very obviously an act of racism. Like, it was a KKK hood, and he just like got to come back to class like nothing happened, and all the administrators just like continue to ignore it and will never mention it.
Sandra, I know you wanted to say something.
I wanted to add on to one of the statements that you said before. They want Black culture, but they don't want Black people. That is the one thing that, PWI is very much feared for. They want the Black culture, but they don't want the Black people. Every year during STEP is the same thing. They love the STEP. They love how STEP is so inclusive, da 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 da. But at the same time, when do you ever include us in the All School musical, for example? When do you ever include us in things that will benefit us, like the showcase where all the agents will come and see us? Like, you want us to step and dance for you. Like, we're kind of like some entertainers. We're not entertainment. We came to this school to get a better education, but it seems to us that you use us to profit. We're like the face. And also, I hate it when it's time. I hate it when it's time to take pictures. And then, of course, like, they have to get the Black kids to make sure that, they're included in the pictures, just to make sure that, they're seen and all this kind of stuff. And then it's just like, how do you benefit me at the end of the day? Thank you. I'm so sorry, guys, about the pages. But it's like, how do you benefit me at the end of the day? You use my face, you use my body to profit off of. But at the end of the day, it's just like, you don't fund most of the things that come towards me, if that makes any sense. I'm trying to elaborate where I'm coming from. But yeah, it's just like the fact that when it comes to STEP, especially gospel in the vocal department, they love when gospel performs all the time. But at the same time, it's just like, you don't put any funding in gospel. You don't put any funding in gospel. So you can't love the thing that you're not providing most of the time. So yeah.
Thank you so much. And now we're going to move forward with another question. This one is going to be regarding your experiences with academics and being Black or Hispanic. So do you feel like when you went to a specialized high school that people look down on you academically, whether that's like discovery program, asking for your test scores, or like even people getting into colleges and like getting accused of affirmative action? What are your experiences with that? So
I have so many stories I can tell you. We can be here for 5 hours. First of all, there was a Black valedictorian a couple of years ago, and she got accepted into most of the Ivy Leagues, and she ended up going to, I think, Yale. And all anyone ever said was, oh, she only got in because she's Black. She only got in because of affirmative action. Anytime we talked about college and, I talked about, going to these higher levels colleges, it was like, oh, you'll only get in because you're Black. And it's just a way to like diminish any kind of awarding or any kind of accomplishment of people of color, especially Black and Hispanic students, because it's just like, you can only get in because you're Black. Even on the first few days, my first friend told his mom that, oh, he made a Black friend, and she was like, oh, she got him through Discovery, right? And it's just like, like, what do you want me to say to that? Like, do you want me to say thank you for appreciating my presence here? Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Sandra?
Okay, guys, I'm sorry, I'm talking a lot, but one thing that let me hear the question real fast, real quick, because I had the question on top of my tongue.
Have people question your academic performance because you're Black?
Yes, yes, they hate educated Black people. They feel threatened when they see educated minorities. I don't know what it is, but just something in them just fires up, man. They dislike it. I don't know what it is. They feel so threatened when they see a dark-skinned female with a 4.0 GPA. They feel so threatened. It's like, I'm not coming for you. I'm fighting for the same opportunities that you're aiming for. There's no need to feel threatened. And so every time like it comes down to it and I get 100, it's always like, oh, you cheated, or like you didn't really study for this test. And it's just like, what do you mean? Thank you.
When you listen to them talk, you don't want to hear like.
Sorry, one of the customers were talking to me. They were sharing their experience. But it's just sad. It's sad that people have an experience with being looked down upon on like educational wise. Like it's one thing where it's just like I could get that 4.0, but I'm never gonna reach your level. Like it's sad to say, but I can get that 4.0, but I don't mean I'm gonna end up as valedictorian because the one thing that holds me back is the fact that I am Black. So it's just like they feel the type of way where it's just like, oh my god, like she's like, let's look out for her, like let's gang up on her, and it's just like, relax, there's no need for all of that. Like it's equity here. So yeah, that's my stand.
And Mamadou, would you like to speak on this too?
Yeah, they both kind of hit it off, but I'll just add on to like my own personal story. So I remember like in the beginning of freshman year where like a lot of students were sharing like the SST score. And I remember like seeing my score and it was kind of higher than most of my peers. And they would say things like, oh, you only got in because you were Black. They added points to your score because they want to diversify the school. Obviously it isn't true. There'll be more by POC in the schools, but it was like a very stupid rumor that kind of hurt my self-esteem because at a point I felt as though, oh, do I not actually belong here, or am I only here for the sake of quotation marks diversity? But like it doesn't really matter at this point. And then there's always that kind of like how you're not expected to be smart, and they kind of direct it to is either you're Black or you're smart and you can't really be both, and they accuse you of cheating or they expect you, oh, you're not really doing so and so. I was kind of like very horrid at a point because it's as if you don't really deserve that position. I know Elizabeth and Sandra both spoke about the discovery program, and that happened to me and my peers. I'm kind of grateful enough to like have, like I was like in my year, there are a lot of Black students as well who kind of went through the same type of experiences. So we kind of were able to like attest to that and share with that. But like, let's say it was just being on my own, I don't know if I'll really be able to handle that kind of pressure or embarrassment. But yeah.
Thank you. So, oh, you can go, but I just want to say one thing.
Yeah, jump in. Go ahead.
Yeah, because we have 3 more questions to get through, we're just going to be extending to 6:40, if that's good, and we're just going to try to fit in a few more, just 3 more questions. You can go, Gabby, if you want to add to this.
Okay, so just really quickly, I wanted to add on that at Tech, especially in college season, if you are a Black or Hispanic person, you will be constantly told, no matter what school you go to, that affirmative action helped you in some way. So if you get into one of the Ivies or if you get into a top school, you will be told that you're an affirmative action kid. You're the only reason that you got in was because of affirmative action, et cetera, et cetera. But if you don't get into those schools, they'll tell you, oh, even affirmative action can help you. Oh, you obviously must be stupid because you couldn't get in, even though you have affirmative action. And that extends to literally every single opportunity that you will ever get in your 4 years. Like if you start an internship, oh, they only wanted you because you're Black. Oh, they only wanted you because you're Hispanic. Oh, you didn't deserve this, blah, blah, blah. If you start a new club, if you like become on the board of a club, oh, you're only there because they wanted to increase their diversity points so that they could get more funding, blah, 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 blah. Like it's gotten to a point where I literally have stopped telling people what internships I'm doing, what boards I'm on, what colleges I'm going to apply to, and I refuse to do it up until like 2 weeks before I leave that school because I'm not going to be tortured by being called an affirmative action kid for my last 3 months at Tech.
Thank you, Gabby. And moving forward from this discussion about academic experiences, how do Black and Hispanic kids try to get through all of these experiences at specialized high schools? And specifically, talking about Black student unions, ASPIDA, and Latino student unions and other organizations. If anybody would like to speak on that matter. Brianna?
Yeah, like you mentioned, pretty much, I think the way that we get through these schools is we stick together. And so when you walk into a specialized high school and people don't look like um, you tend to seek out other students who have similar experiences to you. And usually that's in your racial or ethnic group. And or when you have experiences with racism like I did and many other students do, and you don't know who to turn to, often the first thing that you think of is to go to your BSU or your ASPIDA, or go to students that look like you so that you can find some support, because often that support is completely lacking in the administration itself. And also a lot of students also turn to advocacy as a way to do this. Like I mentioned earlier, we kind of take on the burden of having to change the culture at our schools, you know? So because we don't want other students to go through it. We don't want to have to feel othered or constantly have to defend our existence in our schools. So we find other students that will support us, Black student unions, ASPIDAs, advocacy groups, student equity groups, things like that.
Thank you. And anybody else who would like to answer this one?
Yeah, just to speak to a little of that too. I find that to be very sort of difficult in Staten Island Tech, because one thing I didn't mention before is that Staten Island Tech, as you guys saw in the admissions, only one Black person got accepted this admission cycle. So in Staten Island Tech, that's real. In my school, I know 2 Black kids across all 4 grades. Across all 4 grades, that's not even 1 kid per grade. So the Hispanic Black Kids Club is combined, and I'm the president of that club. We have to combine because there's just not enough representation to make them 2 separate clubs to begin with. And even in the clubs themselves, the majority, it's maybe like 4 kids that are actually Blacks or Hispanics, 5 maybe, and then the rest are just Asians and, well, AAPI and white kids who just want to embrace our culture, you know. So we do find some security in finding people who are genuinely not our culture but accept us and actually do want to embrace our identities instead of just being racist towards us. But one thing to do that I do like to point out is that we're just in the single digits, and it's crazy because there's so much experiences that I hear my peers go through that they want to bring it to the administration's attention and everything, but there's just not enough students to talk about it at all. So Science Tech is in a position where there's such a lack of diversity that there's nobody to even voice what's going on.
Thank you for those comments, and talking about those experiences with BSUs and also ASPIDA organizations. This goes into a even bigger question, and for many people, this is a tough question, which is weighing about all of the academic opportunities that you've been given at specialized high schools and weighing that against a lot of the racism you've experienced. Do you think that it was worth it to go to a specialized high school? Would you have, if you knew, or if somebody had told you what has been said on this panel, would you have changed how you applied to schools? Elizabeth, you can go.
Okay, I'm a senior, so I'm gonna be very honest. I would not come here. I wouldn't have came. I'm not gonna sit here and lie to you like everyone lied to me, because when I first went to orientation, the first thing my mother asked was, how many Black students are here? I could tell that there are not a lot of Black representation. How are you gonna help accommodate my daughter? And they said, oh, at the time there was a Black assistant principal, but she left coincidentally the year I came. They're like, we have resources. Nobody here is discriminatory. This is a safe place. Most of the people here are people of color, and it's a safe place. And that's the assumption I felt when I first came there, which is why I ended up going there. But I'm not going to sit here and sugarcoat it for you. Like, all of that emotional labor and distress, it was not worth it. It was not worth it. Yes, I am grateful because it has made me a stronger person. But why do children of color always have to be so strong all the time? Why are we not allowed to be vulnerable? Why are we not allowed to just feel safe and calm in an environment we have to go through and be in 8 hours for the next 4 years? That's just, I would not put that emotional labor, I would not put that emotional trauma onto other people, because still when I'm around other groups, other races of people, I automatically feel some type of anxiety that a racial slur is going to come up. And that's just not fair to me. So honestly, yes, I am grateful for the academic opportunities. It has helped me a lot, but I'm just gonna tell you, like, Black kids, you do not always have to be so strong. You do not have to bear constantly emotional labor. Like, if you do choose to go, I commend you and I support you 100%, because we do need Black and Hispanic students at these schools. But I personally wouldn't put myself through that again. I just wouldn't. I can't sit here and lie to you.
Brianna, I saw you wanted to say something too.
I 100% agree with Elizabeth. Had I known what I know now, I definitely wouldn't have chosen this school. My experience in high school has been like traumatic, to say the least. I spent like most of freshman year in tears because I was just like so shocked with the environment. I was like, I can't believe this is happening. I can't believe this is what's going on. And I'm not even like a crier. So this was a lot for me. And honestly, I seriously considered transferring in freshman year and going to another school, but I was just like kind of stuck between like the educational opportunities or feeling comfortable in my school, which is a choice that no student should ever have to make. You should be able to get a good education and feel comfortable at the same time. But yeah, knowing what I know now, it's just not worth it. The trauma isn't worth it. The isolation, the exclusion, just feeling like you're not a part of your school community, not really a part of it anyway, really wasn't worth it for me.
And just for like one other perspective, is there anybody on the panel who wouldn't have changed the outcomes despite their experiences? I don't know if anybody wants to speak on that. Sandra?
Okay, I had to do multiple things just to come off of this. Okay. I would have not changed my experience because thanks to PWIs, I realized the power that my skin has on people. And because going to a PWI, I've realized that I do want to work in the justice system. I want to change the kind of environment that PWI set up. And I'm grateful that I had a teacher call me a slur. I'm grateful that I met all those white people because they made me who I am. So I say so yeah, I'll say I'll still go. That's why, because thanks to them, they made me who I am. They made me have the passion that I have today.
Thank you. And Gabrielle?
I don't exactly know how I would answer this question, just because I am so on the fence about whether or not I would go. And I think that's a little bit due to quarantine, because I haven't been exposed to all of the traumatic things that happened to me freshman year. But freshman year, like, if my neighborhood high school was not like so terrible, I would have transferred like immediately, like 3 months in, just because of all of the traumatic things that happened. And I think weighing that off with the opportunities that I've had is very hard for me, because I've been able to grow a lot at Tech, and I've been able to realize I want to work in law, and I do want to work on social justice issues, and I want to work at nonprofits. But it also came with with a sort of trauma that gave me really bad anxiety and made it hard for me to interact with other people, because I'm literally terrified of like the racism that comes with it. So I truly do not know whether or not I would recommend a high school like Tech. And I'm not sure if maybe I'm just like the one with like crazy out there experiences, or if this is just like so consistent across specialized high schools, which I've been learning that it is that consistent. But I'm so on the fence about whether or not I would continue to go.
You know, I'd agree with Gabby about that. I think that this is a loaded question for me personally, because a lot of the alienation that comes with being like the only Latino in most of my classes, and like having to go through a lot of the experiences that I did freshman year, I think remote has, of course, like Gabby mentioned, like shifted my perspective to some degree. But for me, also, this question is about taking power back in the sense that I feel like I know that I belong at Brooklyn Tech. I'm smart enough to go there, and I definitely have what it takes to be successful at Brooklyn Tech. So I'm not going to have anybody, any racist person, or any person who wants to defend the current system tell me that I don't belong at that school. And, you know, for me, it's more about I wish that I didn't have to go through this in the first place. I should be able to go to a school like Brooklyn Tech without experiencing the racism and being alienated and being the only Hispanic kid in all of my classes. But so for me, I think like, you know, weighing that for the opportunities I got, I probably wouldn't change what I did, but also acknowledging that, you know, I think everybody's opinions on this question, they're very valid and everybody has so many different experiences. So it really is different. And we'll just end with Angie on this question because we have one more and then we're going to close out the panel.
Yeah, really quickly, just to echo that sentiment, I do think it's very valuable what you learn going through these kind of experiences. Like it toughens your character and it also instills a really big pride in your character and who you are and your background, because hearing so constantly that you're not supposed to be as good as everybody else, you're not supposed to have succeeded, you're not supposed to be there, you're defying the odds, and that should put you higher. That should just give you a sort of resilience that is just so essential for life and so useful, I feel like. So it really isn't for everybody, but me personally, I would still do it. And I do say to a lot of people that they also should take the chance, because one way or another, we can't just back down from the fight. We can't just start not going to the schools because of these things, because that's what they want. They want us to stop appearing here. They want us to stop challenging their attempts at just instilling these types of segregation, you know? So one way or another, it's a lot to learn, and it's not for everybody, but it's definitely a really insightful question.
Yeah, and it's always tough to have to weigh, like, you know, that's just it. I think it's embarrassing and it's proved so much to show that like we as Black and Hispanic students have to weigh whether we want academics or if we want to feel included in being an environment that's not going to crush our mental health. So moving into the last question, and unfortunately we can only have one person answer because we're running out of time, but this is, what do you think needs to change in specialized high schools and in the Department of Education in general to make Black and Latino students feel included and welcome?
I'll start off really quickly so that more than one person can answer because I doubt I could have every single answer. But like I feel like the main thing is to like establish clear school policy and reinforce those policies as well. Because I feel like in the beginning of when I first entered Bronx Science, you know, the administration kind of really said like, you know, we're here for you. Any type of discrimination or prejudice that happens will be reported and dealt with quickly. But like my last 3 years of experience does not paint that light. A lot of these racist acts often tend to get ignored or brushed to the side or like shoved under the rug. And that shouldn't really happen, because when that does happen, it kind of encourages other students to kind of mimic that behavior because they realize that a lot of those consequences will happen. Another thing is to encourage reporting. I, for one, know that a lot of the microaggression or like racist acts I dealt with before, I just chose to not say anything because I felt like I didn't have no one to speak to. But if we encourage reporting from the get-go and have students, you know, feel the need to like, because it shouldn't even be, it's honestly disgusting. But if we encourage reporting, I feel like it will be a lot more of a movement, because I think someone else said it perfectly, but we shouldn't have to be so strong in order to actually quote unquote survive in the schools. Hopefully I didn't take up enough time so somebody else can answer.
We have room for one more person. I don't know if Sandra, you have your hand up to answer this question. But if anybody wants, you can be the last speaker today.
I really didn't have, I had my hand up for like the last question, but like the one thing I can finish off because my phone's about to die. So like this is technically like my last closing statement. But I think the one thing that DOE and PWIs need to definitely change is definitely holding themselves accountable. Holding everyone accountable for the actions, and definitely don't sugarcoat it. I'm so sorry. Let them know the stuff that goes down in these schools. Let people know that people get discriminated. Let people know that girls go home crying at night. Let people know that we go home crying at night because we don't have a place that accepts us. Let people know that. Don't sugarcoat it, because to be honest, DOE is literally a school system with a Gucci belt on. A third place school system with the Gucci belt on. They really ain't nothing. So my closing statement is just like, everybody here, thank you for coming and sharing your voice and opinion, because we really are the change of the future. Like, this is us speaking up and putting out there that, we're not gonna accept, can I curse? We're not accepting no bullshit from nobody, all right? We the next level, we the next presidents, all right? So that's what I want to say to everybody. Thank you for coming. Remember, your skin holds so much power. Don't let nobody take that away from you. Y'all are all beautiful, and remember that we're not meant to be the ratchet ghetto people that they think that we are. We are the next presidents. We are the next lawyers, the next policemen. We are the future, and anyone who feels threatened by that, so be it. So thank you all for coming, and this is my closing statement.
Thank you so much, Sandra. And that concludes our exclusion panel. So I'm just for 2 minutes going to quickly go over some concluding slides, but the panelists can turn their cameras off. And thank you so much for speaking. So just for some concluding thoughts, and then, yeah, so what are some things you can do in order to combat this? I think Angie can speak on to this slide.
Yeah, really quickly, we just wanted to leave you guys with the note that we will not give up. To the left side, we kind of spoke on this a little earlier, and I don't want to take up anybody's time going through it, but please don't be intimidated. We understand that these difficult experiences aren't for everybody, and we're not supposed to be strong. Like we've said it multiple times already, we're not supposed to be strong, but we are. They've made us this way, and we won't let them take that from us now. So we won't give up. Year after year, as Roberto said earlier, we hear these crazy statistics, we hear them talk about us, and today we got to talk for ourselves. We got to say what we needed to say. We got to share our experiences, and now you've heard us. Now the fight really begins, and it's not going to end until we achieve that educational equity that we really deserve, because there's no reason whatsoever that we should be strong, but we are strong, and we're going to use that strength to make sure our education system fixes itself.
Thank you so much, Angie. And moving forward with some of the things that you can do, actually, I would say that, first of all, I'm just going to reshare this. Yeah, so moving forward with some of the things you can do as staff members, parents, I know that's one of the questions that we've gotten is what can you do to help us with like basically like fighting this racism. I would say, first of all, in terms of SHSAT, there's currently a movement to repeal Het Calandra, which is basically the act that mandates that the SHSAT be the sole 3-hour factor that leads to admission. And in order to like have a more holistic admission system, you would need to have to repeal this this law. So you can share the petition, you can tweet your support and call legislators, even if it's not specifically about repeal Het Calandra, but just speaking about the experiences that students face at these schools and talking about how we need change and we cannot act and like we cannot maintain the status quo and expect that things are going to be changing all of a sudden. So here's different links that you can use to access those different resources. And in addition, in terms of violence at the schools, we are going to have a recording of this panel on YouTube and Facebook, the Teens Take Charge YouTube and Facebook pages, so that you can watch this recording again, you can share it with people, and we can talk about what happened here. Because as Sandra mentioned, this is the start of the movement. We've finally taken the conversation into our own hands and really spoken about the experiences of Black and Hispanic students at specialized high schools. I want to thank everybody who came out to today's session. I know you have a lot of things to do, and I really appreciate the time spending coming here and listening to our voices. Please share this event, share what you've heard and what you've learned. And for staff members and school officials who may be here, talk about the specialized high school within your school community. Don't be afraid to talk about the racism and to hide these things in order to maintain a certain reputation for the school. Because I think at the end of the day, we can only really create change by talking about these issues and exposing them, not by maintaining the status quo. So thank you, everybody. Again, I really appreciate you attending and everybody for watching. And thank you to the panelists and also our lovely moderators, Connor, Ivy, Connor and Ivy, and our other moderators who weren't part of the official panel, but they were there in the background moderating and looking after the different people, and also Sydney. So thank you everybody for coming and have a lovely day.